Hello, my lovely year 13s. We're moving now away from the brain and how we study the brain into our biological rhythms. Now, this bit in this area, we're going to be looking in general, what are biological rhythms, the different types and the basic influences, and then we're going to start focusing on circadian rhythms. Now, please note, I know it's spelled with the C, it's circadian, but if it helps you spell, and I'm always a strong believer of pronouncing things to help you spell, Circadian, so you'll know it's spelled with a C rather than an S, but it is pronounced Circadian. Now, in the Microsoft Classroom notebook, I have given you a little bit of blurb about biological rhythms. I've highlighted in red key terms, and I asked you to give a brief definition of the key terms. If you haven't done that, please pause the video and do that. Right, remember, this is about you starting to develop your knowledge of these key terms. What you can do is straight away put them into your glossary. Now, please don't kind of think, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to leave it. Come on, this is your learning. You need to know these concepts. So I want you to do a little bit of research before you come on to this, because it will help you answer some of my questions, because you're doing the answering, not me. So really important. So if you haven't done that, I know some of you will and some of you wouldn't. Come on, don't cheat yourself. Pause. Right, I am sure you've all paused and you've all done what you needed to do on that front sheet with the highlighted terms. So let's make a move on. So I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to ask a key question. Oh, losing my voice. What are biological rhythms? You know, and you've done a little bit of research, and I'm sure you missed there this, and this. So let's have a look. I'll give you a moment to read that. Now, let's start with the last sentence. Biological rhythms are present in all animals. Every single animal, there are biological rhythms. They are so important. Actually, you probably find biological rhythms in all living forms, because biological rhythms help with the body's processes. It influences our behaviors. So these are very important. So let's break down this statement and annotate if you've gone. If you wrote this down, let's annotate if we go. If you haven't wrote it down, pause, write it down so that we can annotate it. Now, biological rhythms. Biological, this means these are processes within our physiological makeup. And rhythms, that means it's some form of pattern. And if we have a rhythm, that means it's going to be occurring. So it's a strong, regular, repeated pattern that helps us to perform and behave in everyday life. Now, when we're looking at this idea of these are cyclical changes, this really means, and it's a fancy word for occurring in cycles, so it's reoccurring. So if something is cyclical, it means it's reoccurring. So it's going to go through its process once, it's going to go through the process again and again and again. But these processes are influenced by the environment. They don't occur because of the environment, but they are influenced by the environment. So it does show you that the environment plays a very important role. So if we look at biological rhythms, they change a person's processes and behavior. So depending on the type of cycle or biological rhythm we're experiencing, it's going to influence and impact on how we're going to behave. Now, I've got three little questions. First one, based on the explanation of biological rhythms, one we've just looked at, why is it important to have biological rhythms? So pause here and answer. Great. Here comes your second question. Biological rhythms are influenced by both internal and external factors. Identify and give a brief explanation of these two influences, plus an example of each. Now, you would have come across them when you've done your key terms. So again, I'd like you to pause here and answer the question. You might think, Mrs. Smith, I've got it in my key terms. You know what I'm going to say? Repetition, repetition, repetition. It's a good thing. Let's answer the question. Pause here. Right, great. Let's move on to our final little question I'm asking you right now. There are three classifications of biological rhythm. Identify what these are, give a brief description of each one, and identify an example of each of these biological rhythms. So there's three things you need to do this, but it's based on your previous research, so you should be able to do this with no hassle. Pause here and answer the question. Right, great stuff. So let's look back at question one. Based on the explanation of biological rhythms, why is it important that we have biological rhythms? Well, why is it important? These distinct patterns of change are due to biological rhythms influence a person's biological process, which impacts on a person's behavior and activity. So they're so important because they're going to regulate our biological processes and they influence our behavior. For example, ensuring that we go through a set period of being awake and sleep. You know, the sleep-wake cycle. If we didn't have them, we either would be sleeping all the time or we would be awake all the time or we wouldn't get enough sleep or, oh, you know what I'm saying? That's why they're important because they're there to help regulate us, so that we can stay functioning. Really important. So your second question, to internal and external influences. Well, the internal one, endogenous pacemakers. So these are internal body clocks that help maintain our biological rhythms. For example, melatonin. We know what melatonin is. It is, can you remember which gland it comes from? Yeah, the pineal gland. And this helps with in this one, it will help with the sleep-wake cycle, but we'll look at those more. And there's also another one you might have used, and I've broke it down so you can see how to pronounce it, suprachiasmatic nucleus. These are all internal, inside, so we call them endogenous pacemakers. They help our biological rhythms keep pace. The external is exogenous zeitgebers, right? These are environmental influences. So things external, endogenous, like inside, exogenous, outside. These are environmental influences that influence our biological rhythms. For example, light, when it's dark, light. Social cues, things like meal times, you know, when you have breakfast, when you have lunch, those type of things. But we will be looking at them in a little bit more detail later. But I'm just looking for you pulling up on those. And our third question, the types of biological rhythms. We have three types of biological rhythms and they are quite different. So our first one, and we've already mentioned it in the spec, is the circadian rhythm. This is a rhythm that takes 24 hours to complete. So once in 24 hours. For example, sleep. We're asleep for so many hours and we're awake for so many hours. Our temperature. Our body temperature sits at a certain temperature for so long and then it will dip. So we have our troughs and peaks and it takes 24 hours for the whole cycle to complete. So our circadian rhythm is a 24-hour. It takes 24 hours for it to do it and it will complete it once. Infradian rhythms, this is a rhythm that takes longer than 24 hours. It could be days, weeks, months. And menstruation, a female's period, takes approximately 28 days, so that's longer than 24 hours. Seasonal affective disorder, right? This in itself can take months, you know, when winter comes along, right? The person can go into depression because of the darkness, the shorter days, but in summertime they're fine. And our third classification, ultradian rhythms, and more than once in 24 hours. That means the cycle happens more than once in 24 hours. For example, the stages of sleep. We have 5 stages of sleep, and we usually go through them about 3 to 4 times a night. So we're not going to look at infradian rhythm, ultradian in any depth, but we're going to start focusing on circadian. So we've answered those 3 questions. But before we go any further, here's a little exam question. Don't know why I've put plurals there. Maybe I was going to give you 2, but I've just given you 1. So here's your question. What is the difference between a circadian and infradian rhythm? 3 marks. Pause the video here. Give yourself about 4 minutes to do it. But remember, it's worth 3 marks. So what do you have to do for those 3 marks? Right, I'm glad to see that you have paused. Now, let's understand what is a key difference between a circadian rhythm and infradian. So what is the difference? But it's for 3 marks. We know this is a pure AO1 question. We know we've got circadian and infradian, and we're looking for a difference. So to get the 3 marks, state what the difference is, then explain what the difference is. But remember, when you're explaining it, it's a difference. You don't just say circadian rhythm is this and infradian rhythms that. It's not actually to describe or explain or outline. It's asking what is the difference. So we need those connector words, whereas, compared to, however. So let's compare your answer. Different color pen, let's do a bit of self-marking. It is the length of time each of these rhythms takes to complete. That's the difference. To get your 2 marks, circadian takes 24 hours, whereas infradian takes longer than 24 hours to complete its cycle. So we've stated what the difference was, and then we've explained what the difference was. But remember, it's looking for a difference. What is the difference? 3 marks. It's the length of time each of these cycles take. Circadian 24, whereas compared to, remember the words, looking for a difference. Right, I'm sure you've got that now because we've done so many different questions last year, so you'll be great. Now, circadian rhythm, and this is where you're going to do a little work so that you're prepped for our next lesson next week. You're going to use all the resources. I've uploaded an additional resource onto Classroom Notebook for you to use as well to extract the information. So I would like you to read and create a detailed description of what circadian rhythms are and 2 types of this rhythm. Now you'll probably see it'll be the sleep-wake cycle, and you'll have supporting research by Sifri, our French guy, cave bearing guy, but you can also have things like temperature or hormones. Choose one of them. Give me a description, explain, first of all, explain what circadian rhythms are. Give me 2 examples with a little bit of detail and some supporting evidence. Right, so that will be our starting point for our next lesson. But come on, this is AO1. You know what I'm going to give you as well is lovely AO3. I've given you the P, you've got to give me the EEL. Right, I want you to develop them as best you can. So I'm giving you the point, you give me the explain. Remember, explain, what does the point mean? Evidence. Remember, make sure you choose right evidence to support your point, but just state the evidence. Elaborate, explain why the evidence supports the point. Evaluate. In further support, or however, a little bit of an evaluation. And then our linking sentence is a mini conclusion that ties it all together. So I've got 3 here. There is an issue with the case study research used to illustrate the sleep-wake cycle. You're going to be looking at Schifri there. Knowledge into circadian rhythms have brought about beneficial practical application. Nice clear point. Let's develop the EEL. And individual differences have been found to have an impact on the sleep-wake cycle. So we've got 3 great points. Let's you develop the EEL. But remember, do the AO1 first stuff. Right, my lovelies, work well. You need to have all this ready for your next lesson because that will be our starting point. See you then. Take care.